This is a really interesting episode because we have Gene Folks, who was actually on the American Apprentice, and he had a run-in with Trump. So we are going to get into that. We're talking about a military guy versus one of the most powerful men in the world, who wasn't president then, but believe you me, he was already a force to be reckoned with. So tune in to find out what happened. Listen, thank you so much for coming on Beyond the Boardroom podcast. I am delighted to have you for so many reasons. Apprentice, you've been on the US version in 2010.
Yes, 2010, right.
And I was on the UK version. So you had Trump, I had Lord Sugar. So that is a connection you don't get every day, both on Apprentice.
That's right.
And also, I think we're both interested in politics on some level. So you are the best guest to have on.
Oh, thank you. You're the best host.
So tell us a bit about your roots and how those influenced you.
I am the product of a Jamaican father and American mother. Having roots in both places, I think that comes with a unique perspective globally, because my family looks like the UN, right? My family has a history of service, starting from my great-grandmother to my grandmother, who was a foster parent. I think at one point she had 15 kids in her home.
Really?
So, yeah. My mother was the same way. And so I went to an air show one time and fell in love with the sharpness and the discipline and the civility of young military veterans. And I acclimated into the Air Force and spent 10 years serving here and in Europe and honorably discharged, and then became a recruiter and picked up that legacy of service. And so I began to help young men and women matriculate into the military. And then when I got out of the military and went into corporate, I ended up doing the same thing, mentoring young men and women.
Do you consider yourself a confident and driven person? It's a tricky question, isn't it? You don't want to sound sort of, but, direct.
Right. Part of the problem is that we're not direct, right? I think there's a healthy way to say I'm a confident, driven person. I would say I'm confident in the fact that I know my strengths and my weaknesses, and I know that I'm ever evolving and growing. And I'm comfortable and confident in the fact that even though I may not know everything, but I know that I can figure it out. I always make this joke. Do you want to get on an airplane with a pilot that's confident or not confident that he's going to be able to land a plane?
Yeah, of course.
You want to go into surgery with a cocky surgeon with an impeccable track record, or the guy that's kind of unclear and not able to make the right decisions, and you might get the sutures left in.
You said something really interesting, which is about obviously the balance between the sort of being confident but not being a narcissist. And I think in that is you don't want also that empty confidence. You kind of have to earn your confidence.
Correct.
And even if, let's say, you haven't got all the stars and you're not sort of qualified in something fully, if you have the sort of confidence that you think, you know what, I can ask, I can find out, I can get that information.
Yeah, no, it's simpatico. It's so weird that you came up with that, which is not surprising. I think confident people, truly, authentically confident people, are not afraid to ask for help. And I think that's an epidemic within leadership, right? Leaders are meant to replace themselves, and yet we find ourselves, we have a rising young star and we want to challenge them. But that's not true leadership. True leadership is to replace myself without feeling threatened.
With the military, there's a military regime. There's getting up very early. There's doing things you don't want to do. There's taking orders. There's humbling yourself. Everyone's the same. What have you taken from that?
I did 10 years in the Air Force and was honorably discharged. I was somewhat rebellious in a way. You would think that having spent so much time in the military, that I would be pro-military regime, and I am not that. Those skills are transferable into the civilian sector because there is a sense of honor and duty and integrity and responsibility. I'm not saying that every military person is perfect, but I'm saying that within the military lifestyle, there is an expectation of brotherhood, sisterhood, that we kind of speak the same language.
Yeah.
And we know how to sort of, have a little bit more self-control when it comes to knowing when to question authority, and then when it comes to knowing when to follow those orders. If something goes down, I at least have a framework from which to come from to do the best that I can to protect myself and other people.
Apprentice.
Yes.
Why, oh, why did you go on it?
It was 2008, Alexandria, and I think I was working on a project, on a real estate project, and I had some friends out in LA, and they called me and they said, "Hey, there's a slot on The Apprentice," and I said, "Sure, I'd be interested." I figured that the star of The Apprentice was a real estate magnate. I had a $35 million deal on the table. I needed another 5 million. It just kind of made sense to me. It really was like this: like they called me, they said, "Send in a tape, and then tell us who you are." And I did everything wrong, right? Because it was so last minute. And I
Right.
sent it to them. And then they said, "We're going to send you an airline ticket to fly out to LA to go through your
So
background
they
check."
wanted a piece to camera. Sorry for they wanted
Yes.
a piece
Yes.
to make sure that you can.
Yes.
Is that what happens with most of the candidates in America?
No.
Or no, that was an
No.
unusual thing. So,
That was, yes.
so normally they would go through some sort of interview process like we have in the UK, which takes
Yes.
up to a
Yes.
year.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Normally,
Okay.
what happens is people apply for the program. And then if you get invited, if they're interested, then what happens is they'll have you go through rounds of interviews. I didn't go through that process, because by the time I got there, a lot of the other 15 candidates had recalled that they had met during the interviewing round,
Yeah.
and so they had one slot, and so mine was very unusual. They literally had just called me. I sent the tape in. I didn't interview with anyone, right? I didn't interview with any of the other candidates. No one. I didn't interview with anybody. I didn't meet Donald. I didn't meet anyone. So they literally flew me out to LA. I went through psychological, how it goes, psychological, criminal background, whole shebang. And then next, I fly back. I was in Dallas, flew back to Dallas, and then I got a call, and they said, "Pack your bags, we're going to send a ticket, and you're going to New York. You've been accepted on The Apprentice. What do you like to eat?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So within 2 weeks, I had this whirlwind situation, and I just ended up saying, "Let's do it." And so I ended up flying to New York and going through that whole experience.
Do you think Trump had quite a say in that then? Did he sort of think, yeah, this guy can go on camera, he's pretty good, go for it? Because he likes to just sometimes use his instinct, I suppose.
Yeah, from what I understand, he handpicked
Mm.
um, me, and I don't know why. So um, and I hadn't had any encounters with him prior to that. So he has a lot of, because he owned the program. I think 50% of it, and he was an executive producer. He had say in who would come on the program and who wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, it's literally
I
the
see why
whole.
he chose him.
It's diff. Yeah, well, probably it must be this in this way similar in the US that you got fast tracked there. That was really quite cool, I think, for you as an
Yes.
actress. And then for
Yeah.
the rest of the herd, you kind of have to go through this application process. People from around the country go in all the cities. You have a
Yep.
central location, and they go to these various central locations, and there's
And we're here.
hundreds and
Yes.
thousands of them. And then there's
Yeah.
different phases, different levels, and you pass through. You can be there for the whole day. Then you go
Right.
back, then you come back again, and then they just whittle it down, whittle it down, whittle it down, whittle it down. And I suppose the piece to camera, although I think they are filming you anyway the whole time when they're doing
Yeah.
this, but the
They are.
actual conscious piece to camera, like we've got it now, it's only
Right.
towards the end.
Right.
That's like sort of the final, well, one of the final steps.
Final piece,
There's
final
a
step.
lot of hoops. There's a lot of
Most people don't realize, Alexandria, and I know, and I'm so glad talking to you, because you can sort of breathe and share this experience. And I don't know how difficult your post apprentice experience has been, but it's interesting because, and I know we're going to get to this at some point, but it's like, people think you're. It's so weird, the reaction you get from people once they see you on sort of international television or in your country. Like, they recognize you, but they don't, and then friendships can change, and things can get somewhat challenging because there's this idea of celebrity, right? And you're just kind of like, "No, I'm just a normal person that just decided to do XYZ." And I think a lot of people don't realize um, the how grueling the selection process is. You're talking about some of the, I mean, like on my episode, half of them were Ivy League lawyers,
mm,
right? And I think that people don't realize the pool from which there's so many talented people, right? And you have to have almost like this magic formula. I don't know if you felt that way, but you almost have to have like this magic formula that says, I'm going to bet on you. And it can change your life in a way that's interesting. And it really, you do have to be a confident, driven person, to good or bad, to not let it get to you.
Yeah, I think
I don't know if you found that similar.
yeah, I mean, I think, well, I think similarly here, anyone that actually makes it to the show has got something. They might be, they all personalities, so they're big personalities for sure, but they've also got something business wise. Even if they are a little bit out there and a little bit, whatever, they have something, some sort of mechanism, some sort of business plan that's credible. Because, of course, the bigger brands, so the Trump brand, Lord Sugar, they
Mhm.
wouldn't associate themselves with anyone that didn't have the right sort of something, whatever it is, to attach
Right.
themselves to. Even just coming on the program, they're very careful who they associate themselves with, because then you obviously
Mhm.
become part of this brand. Even now we're talking about it. There's this thing that will stick with you for the rest, like it'll post
You're right. You're right.
there for
Right.
the rest of it, even if you don't want it. It's it's with you.
Right.
Everyone that applies is good. And but in the UK, they probably make fun of the contestants more. Like the production are more brutal. Just like our media here is really like, when they want to go
Right.
after you, they will. So over here, they've got no problem making you look really silly and whatever. I was quite lucky,
Yeah.
but I have been interviewing quite a few candidates, and some of them, have struggled to find work afterwards or whatever, because they've been made to look
Right.
a certain way when they
Right. Right.
anything but. They're very smart and credible people. So what's it like in the US? Do you think that they make the candidates look a little bit better, or do they also sort of
Yes.
go for you?
Um, no, they don't. I think that my apprentice experience was, challenging because, like we had just discussed, they got me raw. And you sign these contracts and non-disclosures, and you're so excited to be on the program, and you're trying to read the fine print and do that whole thing, and you don't realize that you're giving your life over to a large media organization who is in the business of getting ratings, and they will do so by any means necessary. And so it's very similar. It's interesting that you said that about the UK, because I would think the UK would be nicer, but we're rough. I don't know how they do it in the UK, but I know in the US, we didn't get to see our episodes,
Mm.
right? We didn't get to see the process. And so I remember when, after the show started airing, and I didn't really watch it very much because at the time I was so traumatized. We were asking each other questions like, I don't remember you being in that room, or that's not exactly how that went down, or because they are filming you all the time, and so they literally get to draw a narrative, and that narrative gets it was brutal. I mean, the gossip columns, and um, the way that people would characterize you based on what you were saying or what you were doing, a lot of times, on because they throw these tasks at you that you're just kind of scrambling, and so they're recording you even in times where you're not cognizant that they are, and then they might take that and insert that into a narrative that says you look like an idiot, right? And um, without any thought about, you have to go back into real life. The Apprentice is unique among all reality television shows, I believe, because it's not a dating show. You take real business people who have worked their lives in different vocations. There are real world consequences to how you're being portrayed that can ruin your life.
Yeah.
And right, that can make it very difficult for you to brush that off in a way, right, to where you're able to function in the real world.
Well, the thing is, though, that when you're signing all these documents and the NDAs and all of that print, if you pay close attention, really what you're doing, and you won't really know this in the true form until you're actually in it. But what you're doing is
Mhm.
handing over control of your own brand to that bigger brand. That
Yes,
bigger brand has
yes.
the PR behind them and all that stuff, and the budget to protect.
Right,
In your case, it's the Trump brand with a show, and in our case, it's the Lord Sugar brand, and then also
right.
the show. It's a BBC production, so there's a lot of PR that goes into it, and the loyalty and the budget is towards that. You do not, unless you are loaded and have your own PR people and protection, you are on your own.
Right.
We have not signed up for anyone making us look good. And I suppose the risk isn't that apparent until you're in it and you're realizing. I quickly clocked, very
Yep.
quickly, that it was more TV and less business, very quickly.
Right.
And then you start to
Right.
navigate and go, well, how
Yep.
can I take control back here? And is it worth it? And there's millions of people watching, and you're aware of the
Hmm.
games being played and all
Hmm.
of that. Without giving
Yep.
away too much, you become quickly, you know. So it's
Right. Right. Well, I can give away quite a bit. I think you're right in the sense that, I didn't go on the program to play a game. I was just a guy who had left investment banking, who started a small firm and had a pretty sizable project, and it made sense to me at the time. What I did not anticipate was everything that you just said. The fact of the matter is that there's these huge brands, and they're not there to protect me. They're really there for entertainment, and I don't really expect them to be protective. I saw it as an opportunity, good or bad, to be on an international stage and sort of showcase who I am and what I can do. Now, obviously, things didn't work out the way I had planned because of my military background. There's a saying that we have in Texas that says, I'm gonna show you how the cow eats the cabbage," right? And once I realized that I was playing a game, because they would always try to coach me to say this and coach me to say that, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. I think I was told once that I wasn't playing ball. Okay. It became a situation for me, Alexandra, to where I just didn't want to play, right? And I was not going to play, and you can make me. You're trying to get viewership up, um, and you don't really care how you do it. That goes against how I look at business. I'm not going to throw people into a pit just so I can walk over their bodies to do that. And for what reason, right? That was the tone at the time. And I remember having a adversarial conversation with Donald and NBC, and basically said, in my military way, F the Trump brand, F the Apprentice brand, and F the NBC brand. There's a Gene Folks brand that I've actually put into perspective over these last 30 or 40 years. And when you're someone in America that looks like me, that becomes problematic because I've worked so hard to avoid those stereotypes. And I haven't done it with a chip on my shoulder or angry. I'm just know that if I focus on my competency, whatever problems you have with me are not mine. They're yours. Do you want to be successful and work around someone that has integrity and loyalty? And can you get past yourself? Can I do that? And so NBC and I had this battle because they were portraying those very stereotypes that I've had to overcome. And it wasn't until I spoke to lawyers, because we got really adversarial, that I said, "You guys are damaging my brand. How do you want to play this? I don't care about an NDA. Nobody's shooting at me, so let's go." And they were completely silent.
from what I've found, it just really depends, like your headspace, where is that at? Obviously, there's an awareness of how you're being portrayed and whether that's successful or not successful and how that's going to look. But then there's also how much you want it, I suppose, like the end goal. What is it that I'm going
Right.
for? What am I prepared to put on the table to get to that point? Is that important
Yep.
enough? Am I prepared to put this onto the table to risk to get this thing, or actually do I not even want the reward? That's a very important question. And then
Right.
that sort of together comes to determine the outcome, I guess, and whether you want to stay on, and I suppose your whole
Mhm.
attitude towards that thing. So some really wanted it, there was nothing else going on, let's say, in their life at that point, no kids, no
Yep.
this, no that. And it's like,
Yep.
I'm basically young and broken on basically on the street, or in a student hostel. So let me just go for it. This is it. I'm going to put everything there. I'm just going to block out the
Right.
noise. Yes, all this stuff is going on. Yes, they're doing this. Yes, my brand is at risk. But you know what? I don't even have a proper brand anyway. I'm just going to go now. Let's Russian roulette
Right.
this. Let's go. And
Yep.
then that sort of energy, I think,
Right.
older the contestants are, there's a big difference between
Yeah.
someone who's 22, someone who's 32, someone who's 42. Your needs, your risk
Yeah.
that you're prepared to take is all different. For me, I had already had, three little children at home. I was moving house and that. I wasn't probably in the right frame for this. However, the whole interview process and being on the show, that was all interesting. I enjoyed the tasks. I did well on them and all that. But, you know,
Yeah.
you kind of realize the gameplay and this and that, and you think, well, not for me.
Yeah, it depends on where you are. I did the same thing. I walked away, right? Very acrimoniously. Whenever you present someone with an opportunity, if that there are some people that are willing to do anything to make that
Yeah,
opportunity work.
100.
I am not of that mind. I am not of that mindset. And listen, I'm not saying that I'm some angelic saint or whatever, because I'm not. I'm a flawed human being like everyone else. But there are just certain things that I'm not willing to do, right? And I'm not going to kiss anybody's ring or, um, you know, expose myself just so I can get ahead when that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And you and I think, I had had a lot of respect for Donald Trump in the '80s as a young business student coming up, and he's this real estate magnate. And I always tell people, be careful meeting your heroes. And he wrote this book and all this stuff. And then I met him. We had a one-on-one sit down. And this is not political, but personally, I was just not impressed. I can respect, what you've done. I mean, if my father gave me 400 million, I hope I could flip that into something big, right? Because that's Trump's story. He's not a self-made billionaire. And I would think that once you can be sharp and you can be shrewd, but you don't have to be cruel. And that's what I felt. I made the right call by saying, if you want to fire me, then effing fire me, because I'm not doing that.
Is that what you
Right.
said?
And that is what I said. Yeah. Yeah. And I think Don Jr. said this. He goes, so why did you just fall on your sword? Why did you just do that? Well, you're trying to lead me down a path that does not align with what happened. I'm not going to just say yes so I can stay on a program. And by this point, I'm okay with walking away from it. So if you want to fire me, effing fire me. I don't care. That's exactly
Yeah.
how that went
Well, that
down.
opened the path
Right.
for fire. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I don't care how much money's on the table. I don't care what the opportunity looks like. And I think that that's uh, a reality television lesson, I believe, that we're facing um, um, real business, right? This sort of lack of, profits over people or whatever. I don't care if you're a billionaire. I'm not doing that.
Okay.
So I'm out.
So,
I'm
so
gone.
was that hard for you?
He did one rare thing with me when I walked off. He says, you didn't give me a choice. He came down, loosened his tie. Doesn't like to shake hands and stuff. Tall guy, taller than me. And he said, you really didn't give me a choice but to fire you. I said, I know. Right. So do I regret the way that I did it? Absolutely not. I do not. I do not regret the fact that, I chose me that day and I chose not to play the game. Um, I think what's been challenging has been his responses. As if you guys are watching how Trump talks about his adversaries in the U.S., and when you are a person that has that sort of reach and that power and those resources, it only takes a little bit of money to make your quote unquote adversary. And so I think what's been challenging has been his attacks and the nature of those attacks and how he comes at it. My attitude is I can run and hide, or I can keep shining the light and do what I did in the military. Is if there's danger, I'm gonna run towards the fire. So no, I don't regret telling him to suck it. He had a young lady come up in front of him in the boardroom because it's a set, and he had a twirl for him. We all went shopping because he wanted the women to be more provocative, right? There's a camera on that somewhere. Somebody has that. I thought you were an eloquent person, but this happened when there's a video out there that you see I wear glasses, right? I wear bifocals, and there's a video out there of me saying, "Hey, I need to go get my glasses. I don't have them because I can't see the fine print on what you guys are asking me to read." But the way that narrative was portrayed was as if I was an idiot with a lifetime of public speaking, by the way, an idiot who couldn't form a sentence. And those are all those racial tropes that come to, that you sort of have unfortunately become familiar with. Didn't want it, trying to do a deal, grateful for some of it. At the same time, I think to be insensitive, either intentionally or not, to other people. I mean, there were comments about, even when he fired me, one of the persons that worked for him, he was like, "You two make a great couple." And then she said, "I work for you, Mr. Trump." She happened to look like me. So you just assume that, these two people of color are a couple. What are you talking about? Holy smell.
I can't speak about obviously with the racism thing. I mean, that's, you've got this experience, you've heard what you've heard and seen what you've seen. I think on the women thing, the thing about someone like him, the Trump, and I do say someone like because my dad, so he's like a typical Polish dad. Some of the things that he says,
right,
and he loves women and beautiful and looking lovely, and but he'll say things like that. I know that in today's society, if he dared speak about what he says publicly, he'll
right,
be cancelled. Then he'll I don't like you, wear a skirt, come on, wear a nice skirt, show your legs. If you've got pretty legs, show them, put on some high heels, all those
right,
things that he would get slaughtered. And he doesn't mean harm by that. I think sometimes, sometimes we take things a little bit. And I also think some of the things about the glasses and that, I think a lot of that is the whole production thing that you were sucked into, where they make
yes,
TV.
yes,
And that TV you are going to be the lamb that comes to slaughter, because that's a golden TV moment. Like that is what you've signed when you go, it's awful, it shouldn't happen. But that's, I suppose, the interesting thing about this whole messed up situation. This is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's crazy. Yes, it is good TV. Yes, in a way we want to see these people suffering and squirming, and that's why we watch the show. But then you're on it and you're the one suffering and squirming, and then your reputation is affected, and then it's like, whoa.
I'll say this about what you were saying about Trump and people of that ilk.
Yeah.
I always respect, I'm a candid person, and I always respect people that are candid, and I get his generation, and I don't believe in cancel culture. I think, what I fought for were people's rights to disagree and be who they are. And sure, the world's changed. Do I think it's gone way too far the other way? Absolutely. Right. There's misogyny, and then there's toxic masculinity. Look, in some ways I respect, and this becomes a shocker, the fact that I did have a lot of respect for the way that he handled his businesses. And he did offer me a position within his company out of all the 15 candidates. And I said no to that. But I also respect the fact that, he's unafraid to speak his mind. That's why I said I don't believe in sort of cancel culture, whether I agree with him or not, right? I think, though, when you do it in a way that's malicious and meant to hurt people, then that needs to be addressed. Trump knows exactly what he's saying and what he's doing. Right?
Yeah, there's no doubt.
I love the fact that he speaks his mind. He doesn't like when you push back. But I think there's a difference between someone like that. He's almost like a benevolent sexist or a benevolent racist. And I think he's so clueless in some sense on the potential responses that he would get. And he's so full of himself that he doesn't really care. And I don't think that's healthy.
Listening to you, it's tough because I'm in the UK. I watch a lot of the different media channels. I see what the BBC has to say. I'll listen to what Al Jazeera has to say. I watch a bit of CNN. I might even tap into a bit of Fox. I might also watch some YouTube channels and what Piers Morgan has to say. And I like to spread the net really, really wide when it comes to media. I love the different perspectives. I have a sister who lives in America. She lives in Michigan State, and she's married to a Marine. And I mean, they love Trump. They love him. They really do. They think
Yep.
he is great.
Yep.
I can understand from my sister's perspective.
You know, I've struggled because I've lived in a very conservative state. And like you, I like to listen to liberal, I like to listen to conservative. Most people think that New York and California are the majority of America. When in reality, it's states like Michigan, where my daughter lives in Michigan. It's states like Michigan and Texas and Ohio and Indiana who may not subscribe to such a liberal mindset.
You think about it, you've got someone who's an entrepreneur. Yes, he's inherited his dad's business, but he's done pretty well. You know, you could have blown that whole fortune and being, you know, so he must have had some brain cells there to continue with that. And he's become really famous and done all these things. He understands business and negotiation, which makes him good. Also what he's done with NATO and things like that. You know, there's certain things, you know, where he's forcing other countries to pay their dues. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the sort of thing that any you would do it as a business person. I would do it as a business person.
Absolutely.
Hang on.
Absolutely.
There's some just basic things that I suppose it needed an entrepreneur, someone with a business head, to go, well, that is a rubbish deal. Let's do this. So there were, it makes sense.
So I believe you are correct in what Trump did for the economy. I also think that you're right. As a business person, you do want someone ruthless. You do want someone that's going to be able to protect your interest. I think that for me, the problem comes in when you do it at the expense of all Americans and some of our allies. And I think, you know, it's almost, you know, my big thing is make it more about the country, not about you.
Most people, most sensible people are actually in the middle.
I believe in balance. Probably most military people do. But at the same time, I believe wisdom demands that I'm not going to blindly follow anyone if I think it's not in the best interest of, you know, and I'm not trying to be naive or altruistic, but, you know, you want to be on the right side of it. And when it comes to, you know, Trump's racial comments or sexist comments, if you ask me what I heard and what I saw, I'm going to tell you.
What's next for Gene Folks?
So like you, I've had a podcast I've been running for about 4 years. And I'd be honored to have you a guest on that program.
Just for our viewers, what's the podcast? Where can they find it?
It's Folks Unfettered. It's on YouTube, and it's also on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you know, all the normal channels. And then also we're kicking off a clothing line. It's called Ocean. There's an entrepreneur spirit in me that's always doing that. And then my consulting firm, still capital raising for people and trying to help small businesses, you know, take on Goliath.
I love the name Ocean. I love that. Really cool.
Yes.
All right, Gene, thank you so much. And
thank you.
I'll see you on your podcast.
Okay, definitely you will. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.